would have heard the topic for discussion today is standards-driven development in Agile world. Surprisingly, when we announced this topic, I got a lot of questions. Why this topic? We didn't get any other topic. And that's where the background might have set the context correctly, why we brought up this topic. Uh, First time in our conference, we brought in quality and agility. Earlier, you would have heard E++ means safety and security. But things are changing. Mike referred a lot of use cases that has happened in the last couple of years. Like I mentioned in my last year's panel, all of us are watching this industry very closely for the last 30 years plus. But especially last 15 years, we are seeing a clear shift. Traditionally, even look at companies like LDRA, our clients used to be mostly aerospace, defense, nuclear, space sectors. But now where we are more seeing action in semiconductors, autonomous systems, electric vehicles, connected industrial systems, medical devices. It's a totally different dynamics. Earlier, people used to wait, even tool vendors like us, we could wait even for 2 years to come up with a new version of our tool. But with this kind of new gen tech sectors coming up, the pressure on those customers to respond to market reality is very high. They work in an agile framework, and where I can see some companies even releasing versions of their tools and platforms in once in 3 months. When I asked one of my industry friend, he said, "Oh, this one is a bug fix was of the last one. Don't worry." But then it is a reality. It is happening now. When we go like this, Mike also mentioned that people are using agile practices in a successful way in safety and security market. But how far we can go agile? Again, I am not to support either side, but people are following it successfully. But I have one use case where somebody told me, Shinto, we followed agile practices in aerospace program, but finally it looks like it is going to be a hovercraft instead of an aircraft because the requirements keep evolving, keep changing, and finally we lost the way. So how far we can go agile, and that's something which we will discuss today. Now coming back to the topic standards-driven development, you know how this tech industry works. We have standard bodies, we have regulators who depend upon standards to regulate things. But in the absence of standards in a new industry sector, how do we convince our customers? Many times, actually, I used to get questions. Hey guys, you're very good in aerospace. I'm talking about 5-6 years back. We wanted to start a practice in automotive. How do you suggest? ISO 26262 was in the very early stage. Not many people knew what is really on the paper coming out. So today we are seeing the same situation, autonomous systems in many other sectors. If you go to standard bodies, they would say we are not getting enough new gen entrepreneurs, innovators to join our committees. They are busy in innovations, funding, and they have their challenges. So standard bodies needs new gen entrepreneurs to join to address this issue, and without proper standards, regulation will become a challenge. I remember 4-5 years back, somebody approached me to put a comment on insurance practices for autonomous systems. I was a bit skeptical, but happy to see last year Germany announced first time insurance practices for autonomous systems. So this is the background where we have this challenge on our table, which we thought the best way to address this is we have an excellent list of panelists. We already heard their background; they're the right people. Each one is unique. You can look at Mike comes with a hardware VLSI background. Andrew comes with standards committees. Marcel comes with the compilers, again close to standards. Juhi comes with the middleware sector, which is connecting everybody. So we have a wide spectrum of panelists with us. So this is what we do. After my initial context setting is over, we want at least more than 50% of the whole session, which will end exactly at 1:30 p.m. India time. more than 50%, we want there to be question answer, no slides, no presentation here. We will not bore you guys, don't worry. There's a very interactive session where importance is given to the audience. We want more questions to be taken. Each of these panelists will talk maximum 3-4 minutes on their views on this subject. Immediately after that, I have a question for that panelist, and we'll complete that round. Then straight away we'll come to the audience to take questions. Finally, we will conclude it with final remarks. So we'll start with the senior most guy, Marcel. It's all yours. Your remarks, please.
Thank you, Shinto, for inviting me. Okay, yeah, please stop me when I go over time, because I was triggered by a remark from Mike Hennell just a moment ago about the Agile Manifesto. And yeah, we have Agile, of course, in the title of our panel here, but I really dislike this Agile Manifesto. So the first line there, it states, okay, we have to value individuals and interaction higher than processes and tools. And that doesn't feel good with me, because I work in functional safety. We try to make compilers safe. We try to set up systems, provide tools in the area of functional safety. There's a very, very long history of functional safety, about 150 years. And in that time, we have learned that we have to apply processes and we have to apply tools to make our applications safe, to make trains safe, to make electricity generators safe, to make cars safe. There's a very long history of putting processes and tools in place to make these things safe. So that Agile Manifesto, I don't like it. It says individuals and interaction is valued higher than processes and tools. Now, why do we have to choose between the two? Processes and tools are very important. Individuals and interaction is very important. Why do we have to choose? And that's not how it works. What we try to do, of course, is choose the processes and the tools that make it possible for our individuals, our people, to work most efficiently. We want to select good tools. We want to make sure that our tools are safe and can be used in an easy way, so that you can develop your software in a good way, and you're not stopped by the process and the tools. Because if you make that selection not in the right way, then you run into problems. So yes, both are very important. And yeah, this Agile Manifesto, it tries to say, okay, you value this and not that, and I don't like that. Both are very important. And okay, there's more to say about the Agile Manifesto, but let's stop here. Now, that isn't to say that I'm against agility. Of course not. We need that. And so I'd rather look at the specific side of or sort of implementation of agile development. And that's the iterative model, the iterative software design. Iterative software development fits very well with safety and security. They're very well compatible. If you take the ISO 26262 standard for the automotive industry, it has the V model at the heart of its descriptions. It comes back, it hinges everything, or not hinges, but it uses that as the framework to place the whole standard in. And that's very nice. The V model indicates you have to work on your specifications toward your implementation, and at the same time make sure that your your testing and your verification is all right. Now, the iterative model fits very well with that. In the iterative model, you're trying to go through this cycle of design, implementation, and verification. At all the times in your development, you're trying to keep all the parts of the V in place and consistent with each other. So you don't have to design everything up front. You start with small design, small parts, and then fit everything together. Now, that is a way of agility that fits very well with safety and security. So there, I'm of course all in favor of that.
Yeah, thank you. You brought in a totally different perspective, which we have. Actually, the whole purpose of this discussion is that, I'm sure our audience will have totally different, another perspective. let's hear from them as we go forward. Marcel, I have a question for you because you're one of the senior most guys in the sector which you operate, like Mike in LDRA. You are an authority of the sector which you operate. Uh, you deal with helping people to verify compilers for safety and many other aspects. But imagine a customer from a new generation tech industry, which you've not even heard of, and he's approaching you, he's asking you, Marcel, for a new tech sector, I want to use a compiler. What advice you will give him from a safety or security perspective?
Yeah, of course, our background is in the verification and qualification of C and C++ compilers and libraries. So that is the stuff we do very well. The nice thing of C and C++ is that both of them have very well-defined standards that are updated every so many years. And that makes it possible to develop good verification methodologies for those tools, for the libraries and for the compilers. So those are very helpful. And we see, of course, new programming languages being introduced. For example, there's the Rust programming language that tries to mitigate some of the downsides of C and C++ and still be very responsive and useful for real-time and near real-time systems. But those very well, those new developments often are not based on standards. If you try to do a verification of the Rust compiler, first of all, you have to choose a specific version of the compiler, and then you have to make sure that you have a standard for the language of the Rust language. Now, that language is continually evolving. It's constantly updated. So there's not a well agreed upon standard like the ISO standards for C and C++. So when people ask me for advice there, I would say don't write off C and C++. These have a very long history. There are many, many tools from LDRA that all work on C. We have people working very hard on the guidelines for C++. There's a talk in one of the sessions in just a moment after this that I'm looking forward to. So don't write off C and C++. They have this long history and they have very well established tools that help you to be very productive and useful in your programming and development.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marcel. I mean, we appreciate your views. Now I will turn to Juhi. She comes with a different industry. They are in the business of, according to me, connecting people. That's what they do. Juhi, your views, please.
So I'll give a little bit of background of where we are in this standards world, why we care about it. We are in the world of connectivity, as you're suggesting, Shinto. It's all about enabling autonomy. It's about a middleware that's data-centric, and you would see that, information sharing is so critical for systems to operate. Standards are at the heart of our product from both the interoperability, portability point of view, as well as from quality perspective. So a lot of our customers actually care about many of the standards that were mentioned today by Professor Mike, like DO 178C for aviation, ISO 26262 you mentioned as well for automotive functional safety, ISO 21434 for automotive cybersecurity, industrial safety, medical safety. All of these standards our customers care about and using it. That's the quality part of it, and we care very deeply. Our product is based on open source, open standards. We want to invite scrutiny, right? We don't want to lock in customers with our proprietary sort of middleware. We want to compete on quality, on delivering value. So standards is at the very heart of what I work on, what I work with. And the comment on agility is very well taken, right? We care a lot about making sure lives are at stake. We don't harm a life in the race to get to the market. Our customers are often competing on time to market. We want to support that without risking human lives. So how do we build that resilience? How do we build in, like, agility, maybe in terms of gathering inputs, getting frequent feedback, but ensuring that the quality is not compromised. So those are all the things that we keep thinking about um, where I work.
Yeah, thanks, Juhi, for your remarks. Like I told you guys help others to connect. Uh, but in my opinion, you see standards as two levels. One is at the technology framework, and at the end use, where the domain-specific standards comes in. Now, imagine a new gen customer, somebody I know you even support 5G kind of people in the early stage itself, where things are still not fully evolved at that point of time. How you guide your customers from a safety and security perspective by when you are trying to tell them, hey, use our tools, but how do you give them the confidence level when things are not fully defined?
Right, standards are constantly evolving, as they rightly showed. The world is changing, the landscape, technology landscape is changing. So I think standards evolve, and some standards are newer or earlier in that process compared to others, and some early innovators, and customers want to jump in on that technology and take advantage of being the first on the market, right, with products. But it's a handshake between the customers and us, because we want to also not react. We want the standard to develop rightly. We want to respond to, like, market inputs. We don't want to react. We want to take in the information, know the problem really well. We don't want to jump to solutions. So there is a lot of handshake, lot of transparency, working with the customers, involving them in the problem definition, demonstrating where we are with the standards, explaining. I think it works at a certain pace so that they can be successful. We don't want to compromise that. So there's a lot of expectation setting and resilience that needs to be built in order to be successful with new standards or evolving standards.
Good. Appreciate your views. And in fact, from an audience perspective, if you look at this, our panelists, two of them are logged in from US. It's at midnight time. Marcel and Andrew, it is their very early morning time. They are from Netherlands and UK. But don't you think we should give them a sleepless nights, putting some more questions? There's a time to park your questions. Please, after this round, we need to take your questions. So I look forward your questions. We have tried to ignite you as much as possible. We'll turn towards Mike. Mike comes with a very, another interesting background. He's a hardcore VLSI man. From the time I started interacting with him, I keep, discussing with him on this subject very often. He had also came down to India once as a speaker in aerospace track long back in ITRPLUS. Appreciate joining him from midnight in US, like Juhi. Mike, your views, please.
Hi. Yeah, I'm in the valley at the moment, so I just came over here on a customer visit. Just want to give you a bit of background on my experience working with Agile in safety, in the safety and standards-based developments. So I did start my career as a software developer a long time ago now, where we were working on development of safety-critical software. And we were actually using formal methods at the time. They were very popular back then. We were using a language called Z, but we also used VDM at the time as well. And we were following, I would say, V rather than waterfall. I've never been happy with people describing the processes as waterfall. We always used V because it emphasized the importance of testing. And so I think Agile also allows us to express that focus on testing very well. And I think quite interesting what Marcel said about ISO 26262, because if you do look at that standard part 6, it's got 2 V's right in the middle of it. One is for the hardware side and one is for the software side. But I think, as Marcel said, they allow us to structure our faults and know that there's a development, there's specifications, design, implementation, and tests for each of them. But it doesn't mean that we have to follow that V process. it just gives a way of structuring the way we do our development and we do our testing. So, so I'm now more of a what I would call a hardware guy, and within the hardware world, we've actually changed our development processes quite a lot, so that they do look very much like software from some perspective. We develop our hardware using languages such as VHDL and System Verilog, now System Verilog, which are very much Ada and C-like. But within hardware, you also have to consider parallel processes, because when you actually implement those algorithms, they're implemented in hardware, which is naturally parallel, rather than software which is going to be implemented sequentially, effectively on a CPU. And also there's timing involved, so you have to worry about clocking and a timing process. But the languages are very, very software-like, and so there is quite a similarity between the way we develop software and we develop hardware. One of the fundamental differences is in how we realize that system. So software is through a compilation process, and I would say a fairly easy compilation process. It's easy when you compare to hardware realization, as long as you're using the compilers that have been verified by Solid Sands, of course. You've got a good solid compiler in place. But so in hardware, the way you realize it though is through a very complex synthesis and place and route process, so that you can actually then go to a fabrication, a physical fabrication on silicon. So I think if we just consider the development of those of what is effectively the functional description of the hardware, which is done in our VHDL or our System Verilog language, at that point there, hardware and software look fairly similar, and we do a number of companies do follow very agile processes to develop those behavioral descriptions of the hardware. We had our conference last week in the UK, where which is focused on hardware verification, and most of those companies there now will be doing continuous integration, and they'll be developing automated tests. So not hardly anybody now in the hardware verification world will be using manual testing at all. It'll all be automated, and we use something called functional coverage as well as structural coverage. We still have our structural coverage goals. We have our functional coverage goals. So that allows us to, for each requirement or each specification point, allows us to write a functional coverage point which captures that requirement or that specification point in a description about to ensure that requirement has been fully covered, and then when we run our simulations, we can know that our tests have hit those functional coverage points.
So thanks, Mike. I think you probably have got a very unique background. You started in software and now totally in hardware, and that way you could connect, the similarity or difference between practices in both areas. But I want to hear from you your views on safety and agility.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I see them fitting together very well, because we develop hardware. So if I take ISO 26262 as an example, the key thing there is from a hardware perspective, where we're similar to software, is in that requirements traceability and the coverage of the requirements and specification, and we've got tools that do that very, very well. So going back to what Marcel said, I think those tools are key to make sure that we can develop our hardware efficiently to the standards. And so, as I say, I think if we separate out the development of the function within our VHDL or Verilog languages, that's a very agile process. Can be a very agile process, and the tools support that very well in terms of requirements traceability and the coverage, which I've described. One of the key things I said though is that hardware gets developed, realized in silicon, and one of the key points from a safety perspective that we have to pay attention to is that's a physical material, and within ISO 262 it pays a lot of attention to the fact that you can get a bit flip, and that's a subatomic particle hitting our chip and causing a 0 to turn to a 1. So within the hardware, we have to make sure that any fault like that, any transient fault like that, can be detected, and that's a very, very complicated part of hardware. But I would tend to separate that out from the development of the function and behavior, which is where I see very, very. I see that Agile can be easily integrated into that into that development cycle.
Thanks, Mike. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience. One request, you could also tell to whom you are addressing this question. Otherwise, I will pick up these questions, based on the background of the panelist. Thanks, Mike, your views. We will now move to Andrew. Andrew comes with a very, very unique background. He is a man, I would say, a committee man. He chairs, a couple of committees, member of many committees, and is my colleague. Andrew, your views, please.
Yeah, thanks, Shinto. I've got the luxury here of having had the company introduction already performed for me by the boss. I will come to one of his points in a minute. I guess the real issue with agility in the software world, you have to look back to sort of the 1970s, where software became a key aspect primarily in the defense world, and software development was a Wild West. There was no standards, no procedures. Each company did their own thing, and largely development was down to how the one expert in the room did things. And this meant that sometimes projects were successful, but a lot of them were not. And that was because one person can't do everything, but not everybody was as capable as he. So particularly in America, standards started to evolve out of the DoD. And these, through various iterations, came up with Def Standard 2167, which was very, very prescriptive. And that evolved into MIL Standard 498, which not only was prescriptive, but it actually had templates for all the documents you had to do. And it became, within the defense world, a real joke that, can I order 5 lever arch files of documentation and some free software to go with it? And you'd spend more time filling in the paperwork after you'd finished the work than you did in actually doing the software. That position really was unsustainable, especially with the increasing development of commercial software. And obviously with the advent of the internet, 2167 and 498 were completely useless. And in many respects, the whole Agile manifesto is the reaction to the formality of the defense and the safety critical world. So the Agile manifesto came up with some ideas that were absolutely fine for developing things that can change, websites that you can change day by day, mobile phone features as that came up, the core technology in the phone is quite important. But if your app updates on a daily basis, nobody really cares. They just want it to work, to do stuff, and they want new features. From a safety critical world, that's not so important. What is important is it works, it does what it should do, and it's not going to kill you. And therefore, the formality and the rigidity actually is important, but equally, there is a balance to be had. Depending on what you're doing, some of that formality is absolutely essential, some of it less so. So I think it will be a theme we'll touch on a little bit more as we go through. It's adapting what you're doing for the job. As Douglas Bader, Tin Legs of World War II fame, is alleged to have said, rules of the strict obedience of fools and the guidance of the wise man. So standards we should take as good guidance, but not necessarily adhere to them to the letter. And I'm sure that's something we'll come back to as we go through.
Good, thank you. Here comes the views on the two sides. Some people say it should be more of guidelines rather than just prescriptive standards where people are asked to follow line by line. There's a counter argument when you are given so much freedom to follow as it guidelines. So why you call it standard? So these are counter arguments on both sides. I hear quite often. Now this is one. I have one question to Andrew. LDRA, it's a 46-year-old company. We have been selling our tools to aerospace, defense, those established sectors where long cycles used to happen. Now we have a lot of customers, at least in this part of the world where I am sitting, majority of our customers are in the new gen area. Suppose a new gen tech sector company approaches you and we survive out of our tools. What is your advice? Some people say when nothing is defined, why should I use the tools? So your advice to someone who's in a new gen tech industry where standards probably under development, but no one is sure exactly how things are coming. Your views, please.
Yeah, almost an exact mirror of that happened way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. When the first version of MISRA C was published, it was titled Guidelines of the C Language in Vehicle-Based Software. And one of the first questions that sprung up in the immediate aftermath is, can you do an equivalent for the medical industry? And the committee sort of looked at each other and said, well, what's wrong with that one? And they said, but that's for vehicle software. And so the second edition of MISRA C is Guidelines for the Use of C Language in Critical Systems, because there was nothing in that first MISRA C that did not apply to the rest of the safety critical and increasingly the security critical industry. So the same applies to new industries that spring up. The base ideas of how to develop software are well understood. Yes, we can argue about the rigidity of the V model and the waterfall through to the absolute flexibility of pure Agile, but we know what needs to be done. And the key principles, whether it's 61508, 26262, 62304, the key principles are actually very, very similar across all of these industries. So when new industry springs up or a derivative of an existing one, we know basically what we need to do. And therefore, a tool such as the LDRA tool suite is just as applicable. And we have that fairly regularly when we get a call from a customer and says, we're in this industry. We had one only last week. They do hand tools, drills and power saws and things like this. And ask, we have to apply to this list of standards. And so we quickly refer to those set of standards, take out the bullet points. Okay, we're doing 99% of that. So what we need to look at is how we present the results for that particular customer. So it's all a case of most of what we're doing applies to all the industries, including those that we don't already know about. You know, as Rumsfeld is famed for saying, we have the knowns and the unknowns, and within the unknowns, we have the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. You know, the known unknowns are the ones we know about, the unknown unknowns are the ones we don't yet know about. But applying the principles across, on the whole, is there. And of course, we're flexible enough to be able to adopt and adapt to those new standards, some of which we're actively involved with in defining as well.
Thanks, Andrew. All of you agree that Agile is not just fragile, which many people think. We need it. We need to use it wisely to help people to create safe and secure systems. We also found that we have complex issues coming from various perspectives where all the stakeholders need to work together to achieve that. One single party, one simple organization, one part of the world alone working also is not going to happen. So that's where actually platforms discussions like this make a big difference. Interestingly, as I told we have speakers from different part of the world discussing this common issue which everybody faces together. My perspective is actually how do we create the trust factor in front of our end customer. Customers are looking for trust from a safety perspective, trust from a security perspective. How do we guide them to manage the evolution from a fuzzy logic perspective to a clearly defined standards and regulatory framework? So it is more like working with the customers as a trusted partner. That makes a difference. The trust between we as a vendor and the customer on the other side, how far we can work handshake together, that decides the success. So I hope we all will work together to create that trust-driven world so that we all have better, safe, and secure tomorrow.